Okay, hello everyone and welcome to Ethical Corporation's webinar on materiality in CR reporting and communications. It's great to have you join us. We've had a lot of interest in this webinar, which just shows why materiality is one of those areas that's a really hot topic at the moment. For those of you that don't know, materiality is the process where you rank the sustainability issues that have significant importance on your business and your stakeholders, which in turn provides clarity on what to include in your sustainability report, and it should also focus on which factors have the most impact on your strategy. We're joined today by John, Ved and Ellen from Oracle, Barclays and HB. They will be sharing what materiality means to their organization, providing you with practical advice that you can use in your own reporting and communications as well. Particularly thankful for Ellen and John, who are based over in the west of the US, so nice and early for them, so thank you for joining us. Just to introduce everyone, Vedant Walia runs monitoring, assurance and reporting on non-financial, social, economic and environmental metrics for Barclays, and he's responsible for setting strategy, tracking metrics, and among many of the responsibilities, Ved manages internal reporting, external disclosure within the annual reporting suite, and he's also in charge of Barclays ESG ratings and SRI benchmarks alongside investor engagement. Barclays at the moment is on a journey to become the go-to bank, and is a core part of performance management across the organization as part of the Transform strategy. Ved actually started at the UN, worked at a think tank on sustainable finance issues with banks, investors and insurance companies before he joined Barclays. We'll then hear from Ellen Jackowski, who leads the HP Environmental Sustainability Corporate Governance Process and the Environmental Sales Enablement Initiatives over at HP. She is responsible to ensure pan-HP coordination of all environmental initiatives, including strategy alignment, goal setting, public policy position, and to drive a coherent strategy and implementation plan for training and enabling the enterprise sales force to effectively position and differentiate HP's solutions based on the company's sustainability leadership. Ellen also serves on the board of Climate Savers Computing Initiative. And last but not least, we've got John Chorley. Now, John is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Oracle. In his role, he drives and coordinates all initiatives, both internally and externally, related to environmental sustainability. This covers all areas from IT infrastructure and business operation to corporate reporting and risk management. Oracle is committed to developing practices and even products that help protect the environment. Before coming to Oracle, John started off at IBM and was Vice President of National Envelope, who are a major paper company. John has been with Oracle for 15 years, working in a variety of functions. So we've got some expert panelists here, so thank you to everyone for joining us. As with all ethical corporate events, we've designed this discussion to be as interactive as possible. So please do keep an eye on your screen. We will be sharing some of the company's materiality matrices. We'll also include some live polling so that you can have your say. And use the discussion box to send through any questions to our panelists, and we'll try and get through to everyone. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over our panelists to share their thoughts before we go into our first poll. So Ved, would you like to start telling us a little bit about materiality over at Barclays?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Steve, and hello, everybody. So I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of the materiality process we're running here at Barclays, and essentially our learnings from significantly improving the process over the last year. We've been reporting on non-financial issues for over a decade, but essentially last year we moved towards GRI G4, and as part of that journey, we really re-looked at how do we run materiality within the firm. We've now moved from what was, I think, previously a relatively informal, quite an unstructured process, really led by the Citizenship and CSR teams with relatively little involvement from outside that silo, towards a much more robust and integrated process. We've got broader involvement across the firm. We think the journey towards having a much better understanding of what the material factors are for your sustainability strategy really helps in terms of disclosure, but also in terms of strategy. We found that our materiality process really helped inform our integrated reporting journey as well, particularly in terms of looking at what are we disclosing, to who, and in what format. So I've got a couple of slides, and I think they're up on the screen at the moment. I think the first thing that we sort of struggled with and needed to resolve was, what do we mean by materiality? It's an established concept, particularly when we're dealing with sort of our finance and investor relations teams. There's an established understanding of materiality in a financial sense. We were very clear that we were trying to broaden this out and look at broader social and environmental impacts, and also look at stakeholders beyond the investor, which is actually quite important. If you look at the various standards out there, such as the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board and the work coming out of the IRC, it is still looking at ESG issues primarily through the eyes of the investor. Whereas GRI, we find, is designed to be more broadly focused on a broader range of stakeholders. So what did we do? I'm not going to talk through our process in a huge amount of detail, but there's a few points I wanted to highlight. The first thing that we did was really look internally and said, who do we need to be involved in this process? And in particular, we were looking at internal functional teams that have a very good understanding of their particular stakeholder base, whether that's investor relations, whether that's government relations and public policy, bringing in people who run our customer research and insights functions, bringing in reputation risk. So we brought a broad range of stakeholders together internally and asked them to bring insights from their particular understanding of these issues. We also looked for geographical diversification to ensure that we had representation across business lines and across the geographies where we do business. The second main thing we did was we agreed an approach with this group. We decided which standards we wanted to apply. We looked at how, in particular, we would rank the issues, and this is something that we found in the past. It's very easy to over-engineer. So we decided to go for a relative ranking of issues versus each other rather than a very complicated scoring system. Then the third thing we did was we brought a really broad range of inputs together. I think over the last couple of years there's been an increasing degree of standardization across the industry. So you're seeing a lot more sector-specific work, particularly the likes of SASB, but also work coming out of the Dow Jones, and a wide range of kind of ESG indices. We also then bought a lot of bespoke work that's just done for Barclays, and sometimes has not actually been bought into this this planning exercise before. That's work whether we do surveys with stakeholders across the globe, our horizon scanning work, some of the media analysis work that's done by our media relations team. And we brought all of these inputs together into a prioritization workshop where we really looked to how do we actually agree as a firm what is the most material issues for a broad stakeholder base. The final step in our journey was to actually look at the mapping and try and sense check it against other areas where we identify factors. What we found most useful was actually trying to compare the materiality matrix with what our annual risk factors are in our annual report. And we found that there was actually quite a good degree of crossover. Obviously, the risk factors will go into a lot more technical detail for certain areas, but overall, there was a good overlap. The two other things we did, one was we invited an external agency to facilitate and validate our process, and also to inform us on how they compared us versus our peers. And finally, our materiality process was actually reviewed by our external independent auditor. This is not our statutory auditor, this is this KPMG who provides assurance on our citizenship disclosures. If we can just turn to the next slide. Very briefly, just discussing the matrix that we actually published, we identified 23 topics that were material to the firm. And the broad assessment criteria we used was looking at those issues that we see are raised continuously by a wide range of stakeholder groups, whether that's investors, regulators, media, our customers, NGOs, pressure groups. And those issues then which are actually significant to the firm overall and the group overall. And the top right there are those, highlights those 5 issues which we felt were the most material. We covered them in depth in our overall key annual report. The other areas that you can see on the slide there, sometimes they're very important to a range of stakeholder groups, but they might not be that important to the group overall. They might be significant to a certain line of business, whether that's, for example, access to financial services, very material for our retail business in Africa. Looking at areas like indirect environmental impact, very important to our investment banking businesses. And what we found as a result of this process is that it really does bring a wide range of internal stakeholders together to understand what's material and to also get a better sense of where are we best to disclose this information to tackle our key stakeholder groups. Looking forward, as Steve mentioned, we're on a journey. We're going to look to improve this process this year. One of the things that we do internally that we don't yet do externally, and there's various reasons for that, is to actually put a momentum overlay on this, to look at what's going up in importance, what's going down in importance, trying to provide a little bit of a forward-looking view. However, there are certain restrictions on what we can report publicly in terms of forward-looking information. Unfortunately, that's it from me. Handing back over to Steve.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ved. That was really thorough and in-depth. We're actually getting a few questions along as well, and we are taking notes of those, and we're going to open up at the end after everyone's spoken in a question and answer session. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ellen, who's going to talk a little bit about sustainability over at HP. So, Helen, are you there?
Yes. Thanks so much.
No worries.
Go ahead.
No,
so
that's
at
good.
HP,
Yes.
We've been reporting since 2001. And in 2012, we commissioned a formal materiality assessment that was conducted by BSR and GlobeScan. And the purpose of that was to gather similar to what we just heard, to gather insights through interviews and surveys of both internal and external stakeholders. And it also included a review of HP documents as well. And the results really reconfirmed long-standing areas of focus, highlighted various gaps, and then identified emerging issues and leadership opportunities for our business. So even though we didn't do our first formal materiality assessment until 2012, since we'd been reporting since 2001, we did have a pretty good idea of what we thought was most material, and it did end up that many of our assumptions and what we had been reporting had really aligned. As well, G4 also continued to put more emphasis on the importance of materiality for us and how we were using it internally. When we step back and think about, why is materiality important to us, what are we trying to answer with that process, it really is which issues matter most to the company, and how can we align our sustainability strategy with our business priorities. So, and not just looking at one independently of the other, but really trying to align it and integrating sustainability as part of our overall business strategy. And as part of this, how can we identify the products, services, and business models that have the greatest potential for sustainable business growth? So as we're looking, to future of initiatives, goals, and activities within the company, with the eye on business growth, but really sustainable business growth, this tool is really important to us. And then finally, how can we communicate to stakeholders about the scale and the scope of our corporate citizenship or sustainability activities? And this framing is really drives the reporting activities that we do, and each year that's only gotten more aligned over time. So it's really been a journey for us. Over the last 2 years, we've done refreshes of that initial 2012 materiality assessment, they haven't been as thorough as the first project that we launched in 2012, but each year with different developments in the business, we've taken another fresh look at that materiality assessment, and some things continue to change. So we really consider it a living thing. It's not static. It's not something that you do once and put away, but it's something that you really critically look at each year as the business is changing, as your sustainability goals and objectives are changing as well. And when we also kind of think through, what do we want to use this analysis for versus what do we want to make sure we're stepping away from, aside from being living and breathing, we've decided that it's really not a tool that tells a company what to do on each issue. It's not really a tool that tells a company how well it's performing on each issue. And it's definitely not an exact science. There's some judgment that is involved, and as part of the process, we really have an open dialogue with the agencies that we use as we're developing this. We do use a scoring model, but having that overall strategic discussion has been really important in trying to figure out and finalize the actual process. But we do use it as a relative ranking of the issues that establish a direction for the priorities in strategic development, and we do use it as a tool to build that internal alignment. It's really facilitated lots of very deep and important internal discussions where we're bringing new executives on board with the purpose of this, with how it affects some of the decisions we hope that they're making and what they're considering as they're building their own strategy for the portion of the business that they control. And it's also, obviously, a tool that informs specific decisions around investments and the reporting content. So overall, as this process has continued to evolve since 2012, it continues to be more important each year, and it continues to really drive the framework for our report.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us as well, Helen. Lots of great questions coming in again, but before we go to those and to our first poll, I'm just going to bring John in. And John, if you could explain a little bit about materiality at Oracle, that would be great. John, okay, we seem to have a few technical difficulties with the sound there as well. What we'll do is we'll go to our first poll, and then we will come back to John and we'll hear a little bit from him at the end as well. So if everyone has a look at their screens now, our first poll should be up there. And it's saying, for you at home listening in, if you have undertaken a materiality assessment, what was the most challenging element? So you can make your votes. You've got the option of stakeholder engagement, calculating the risks or the impacts, and recording that data, communicating performance with your stakeholders, or using the data to refine your strategy. And there is an option there as well if you haven't undertaken a materiality assessment, and if that's why you're coming in, and maybe you might want to put some suggestions as to why you haven't done that yet as well. But if you can make your votes, we'll close that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, fantastic. So let's have a quick look at the results. They should be showing up on your screen now. Quite a significant amount of you listening in at home haven't done a materiality assessment as well. So hopefully this should give you some good examples to take away from. The highest of those who have, though, is about calculating the risks and recording the data as well. So I will ask my colleagues to sort of share their reflections on that. If I can come back to yourself first, Ellen, what are your thoughts about those results? Do they resonate with you? Would you have voted anything differently?
Sure. For HP, I probably would say the stakeholder engagement piece, simply because, at least in the initial process in 2012, identifying the volume of stakeholders and involving them and getting the right contacts for the materiality assessment was a laborious process, trying to make sure we got that right. We really wanted to be thorough and broad and deep, and that really took a lot of effort. But then in each refresh year, once we had kind of undergone that initial process and we had kind of a framework that we had established and that process and those names and the outreach method, it became a little bit easier. But for us, that was really where it was probably most complex from the start.
Okay, excellent. And for yourself, Ved, over, in terms of your experience, would you agree with those results, or would you have voted anything differently?
No, I think I tend to agree with the results, and the stakeholder engagement piece is critical, and particularly when you do look at stakeholders both inside the business, but also critically for us outside the business. But I do agree that the calculation aspects are probably the most challenging, and what we found is best not to over-engineer or over-quantify the case. It's good to have robust data that you can use to illustrate specific stakeholder viewpoints, ideally data sets that are pretty global and pretty diverse and pretty robust. But trying to bring that all together into one unified scoring system, I think, can be quite difficult. And in my experience, if it's over-engineered, what you tend to do is spend most of your time arguing about the weightings rather than the results.
Okay, excellent. So that's really good feedback there. Keep it simple is always the best way to go. We've actually got a couple of questions that are quite related to this as well. For one of the questions, Mark Harper is asking, can you discuss how your materiality assessment links or merges with your organizational risk matrix and the risk management processes as well? So, Ved, if I come back to you on that, how do you feel that materiality kind of merges in with your overall risk matrix and the risk management assessments as well?
Thanks, Steve. So that's one of the exercises that we undertook for the first time, is to compare. So every year in our annual reporting financial disclosures, we have a set of key risk factors. We've identified 5 groups of principal risks: market risk, credit risk, liquidity risk, operational risk, and reputational risk. What we found is that the most material factors for us do align really well with the risk assessment. However, what we would call more specific, ESG risks, such as carbon emissions or climate change, are covered in our risk review, but not in the same level of detail. So we found they actually work quite well together, where you've got a very robust and comprehensive risk factors review, which does cover reputational risks, ESG risks, but then additional detail is then available in the GRI disclosures that we make.
Okay, fantastic. And Ellen, did you have any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I would say very similarly, the risks to the business plays directly into the assessment, and particularly, towards the end of the process when we're having those more refining discussions about where each of those topics fits on the matrix. That the discussion of what are the risks in addition to what are the opportunities for the business definitely comes out very strongly in that discussion. So I think it's a clear input. It's part of the decision-making process of where each of those topics lands in the matrix, and it definitely is aligned very tightly, not just about the opportunities, but definitely the risks to the business as well.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. And just to bring in one more question as well, I mean, Pascal is asking, who would be the typical stakeholders in the organization for the materiality assessment? So I know that, Ved, you talked about looking internally and making sure you picked out people who were close, had a really good knowledge of their stakeholders. But we're asking, what sort of organizational level do you focus on? Is it very high level? Is it kind of experts in that area? Who do you need to engage with internally? Sorry, and that's to Ved, please, if you're there.
Hi, Steve. Yeah, for us, I think in terms of actually formulating the matrix and the people that we would engage with on a more regular basis, it would be subject matter experts. They're relatively senior. But in terms of the actual outputs of the exercise and how it then drives further disclosures, the audience for that goes all the way up to the board, because in terms of our review and sign-off process, all our citizenship disclosures go through exactly the same process as our financials. So it'll go to disclosure committees and then to board committees for review. So the outputs will be seen by the most senior people within the business.
Okay, brilliant. That's great. Now, we seem to have John back as well, so it'd be great to hear a little bit from yourself, John, about materiality and your general strategy over at Oracle as well.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay now?
Perfectly. Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, yes, so we've gone on a similar journey to the other participants. I'd say we also have a need to continually evaluate what materiality means to our business. If you look at Oracle maybe 5 or 10 years ago, we were a software company only, and clearly that creates a profile for our company that is you know, oriented towards the people and the real estate and so on in the business. With the acquisition of Sun, we became a hardware manufacturing company. Obviously, that had a very significant impact to how we viewed materiality, and it was important for us to incorporate that in our assessment. Clearly now we have a global supply chain and with manufacturing facilities and hazardous materials to consider, waste material and so on. All of that then has to be reflected and was reflected in how we assessed what was material to our business and how we reported. Similarly, over the last few years, the biggest change has been a move towards cloud computing. That really has driven a significant increase in data centers, and that obviously again shifts what is material to our business. So I'd say that the single message I would make is that this has to be a live process where you're continually looking at what is material to your business as the operations in the business shifts, and you use that in order to focus on two things really. One is, you know, what are the real impacts? What are the real areas where you can have a positive impact? And then secondarily, that helps you determine where you can focus the resources, because in any business, the reality is the resources can be limited, and what materiality does is not only focus you on, you know, what's actually happening in the business, but also on those areas where you can deploy resources, because there's an alignment between your environmental performance and the current business operations and priorities in the business as a whole. Back to you, Steve. Hello?
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that, John. And, you know, on those questions, a lot of people are asking, how often do you do your materiality analysis as well? How do you make it simpler, and when do you carry out the full process? So you mentioned there that it's very much a live process. I mean, just to help Clara out with her question, how often do you go through a full materiality analysis?
You know, we conducted a 2-day workshop about 2 years ago. Since then, and that really, we brought together a group of cross-functional stakeholders throughout the business. We assigned various working groups to help us, with each group identifying within their own domains what the priorities would be. That was then coordinated through our environmental steering committee, which meets quarterly. Since then, we've really done that somewhat less formally as conditions within the business shift. So certainly our experience has been that after putting a stake in the ground, as it were, with a more formal process, it's possible to continue to refine that in a somewhat less formal way. Clearly, if there was a major shift in the business, we would redo that more formal process in order to revalidate the materiality matrix.
Okay, brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you for that, John. Okay, so we're going to go into our second poll now, which should be coming up on your screens shortly. Now, this poll is all about defining what is the biggest influence when you're looking at material issues. So are they going to be investment decisions, employee or candidate concerns, customer purchasing decisions, pressure from NGOs, or does it come down to regulation as well? So if you can make your votes on those, decide, what is the #1 factor, and this might be different depending on which industry you're in, but what is the biggest influence when defining a material issue? So if you can make your votes, we'll close down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Excellent. Okay, those results will be showing on your screen now. So a lot of people are saying that regulation is the biggest influence as well, followed very shortly behind by investment decisions, and customer purchasing decisions coming in third. I'll come back to yourself, Ellen. I mean, for you at HP, would you agree with those, or would you look at a different influence on that?
I think that makes sense. I mean, with the regulatory landscape, of course, whatever is regulated or about to be regulated, that you don't have a choice. So, of course, that's kind of the bottom line, like the foundation of where you need to start. And then customers and investors, of course, are really driving the impact on your business. So I think that makes sense that those kind of pop up next. And then employees, of course, are also important, but maybe as a less impactful driver of a material issue. And then pressure from NGOs. That one actually I could see being a little bit higher. I do think that dialogue with NGOs and what they're caring about, what they're seeing, and how they'd like you to shift your business, that is something that HP does take seriously, and we have continuing discussions with NGOs, and that does play into our strategic decisions to a certain extent. But in general, I think this is about right. You start with what's being regulated. That's table stakes to be able to play, and then the key impacts on the business from investors and customers, and then following with employees and NGOs. That makes sense to me.
Okay, brilliant. And for yourself, John, would you agree with what Ellen said and what the results are showing us there, or is it a little bit different at Oracle?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the point that the regulatory landscape is a bottom line issue. It's sort of non-optional, and certainly is something that we have to adhere to very closely. I would actually rate employees somewhat higher. As a company, we're very dependent on the quality of our employees, how they, and that is very influenced by how they view your business. We want to recruit the best talent. That creates the lifeblood of the company long term, and how your company is performing in the environment, how it's viewed by your candidate base and your employee base is absolutely critical. In that we're in a war for the best talent, as it were, in Silicon Valley. So we rate that pretty high because it is very material to our business. And as a result, a lot of that becomes about, great communication and really investing in how to do that. and also clearly about having the good performance that you can communicate. So while I generally agree with the results of the poll, I'd say at Oracle we rate that employee piece a little higher.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. And Ved, I mean, with your experience working, with investors and everything like that, perhaps you could share some thoughts on why the investment decision is so high, and what that means at Barclays as well.
Thanks, Steve. I mean, I do agree with the results of the poll, and I think the reason we've got investment decisions as being one of the key areas is because we've seen a general trend for investors to try and want a much broader understanding of the context of the business and its long and short-term prospects. Now, there's a growing understanding in the social responsible investment community, but also now increasingly the mainstream investment community, that there are a wide range of factors that influence success for a business. Some of them are part of their core valuations, but others are now starting to become material. So we think looking through an investor lens, and particularly looking at areas which are slightly outside the current valuation models, whether they're longer term issues or looking at an issue from a different perspective, I think that does make a lot of sense. I mean, the one point I'd add, I think we'd agree at Barclays with the relative ranking here, but I think I'd probably put pressure from NGOs slightly higher and maybe sort of outline a dynamic that potentially emerges, at least in our experience, where you can see NGO pressure or an issue being sort of an early indicator that that issue is going to grow in importance. And, NGO campaigns do influence social responsible investors, and in time they can influence regulators as well. So I do think there's a little bit of interconnection there.
Okay, excellent. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. Okay, we're going to go straight into our final poll now as well, which is really looking at your stakeholders. So they're quite well linked, but this would just be to ask the people back at home and obviously our panelists, who do you feel are the most important stakeholders? As John mentioned, this might be different depending on the nature of your business. So John put employees, really up there in Silicon Valley being the attraction of talent as a core business strategy. But if we can get your votes in, whether it's going to be your customers, NGOs and charity groups, employees, regulators, or investors. So if you can all make your votes now, we will show the results in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, perfect. And those results are going to come up on your screen now. So as you can see, a lot of people there are going with customers. So it's really demand coming from your consumers and from your customers. Followed up by investors, as we talked a little bit about previously, and then employees as well. Quite interesting, even though regulation is one of the reasons that people are going into this and doing it because it's a must-have. Regulators aren't always the most important stakeholders as well. So if I can come back to yourself, Ellen, what are your reflections on that, on those results? Would you agree or disagree?
Yes, so I would have definitely put customers first as well. Again, they're really driving the success of your business at the end of the day. Are they coming and purchasing from you, or are they not? Are you meeting their needs and aligning with some of their values, and do they see themselves reflected in their needs, reflected in your products and offerings and how you run your business? So for us, I think that probably is right on. Obviously, each of these groups are really important to a company for a variety of reasons, and they have their own kind of audiences internally where they kind of rise in importance. So I think each of these groups has a clear impact on a company, their hopes and their strategic ideas and their impact definitely has a space. But I think at the end of the day, for us, the customers are the ones that are really driving this process.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that, Ellen. And John, if you can share your thoughts on that poll and whether you'd agree or disagree with those results.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, we're a customer-driven organization. You know, the way our customers look at our products is obviously the number one thing that's material to our business in terms of driving revenue, driving sales, driving margins. So, you know, that is what we track. We track the number of customer inquiries that come in that look at these environmental factors in their buying decisions. We track that pretty carefully, and it influences a great deal of our revenue. So, you know, we know that that's material to our customer base, increasingly so, and therefore it's the number one thing we pay attention to. You know, again, you know, all of these things are important, and I do agree that, you know, often the NGOs can be like an early warning system in terms of what's going to become an issue. But, you know, customers for us is number one, whether it's investors or employees is you know, a close call. But, you know, we certainly do listen to the voice of our customer as being the most important stakeholder for us.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that, John. And Ved, if I can come to you finally as well, what are your thoughts on those results?
I think I'd agree that, you know, customers are the key driver for this, and it's quite interesting for us given the, I guess, the two different parts of our business where we've got one which is very much a retail consumer-facing businesses, and the kinds of questions we get from them around ESG and sustainability issues, and contrasting that with our more kind of institutional clients, whether they're large corporates, large public sector organizations, and also, you know, investors. Completely agree on that, and I actually believe that in our discussion with investors, they would also encourage us to have that same view. Essentially, that if you're not delivering this as part of your customer centricity, if your customers aren't asking for this, and if you're not able to prove the case how this will improve either your brand, your connection with your customers, and how that ultimately translates into revenues, I think it'd be a hard story to sell. So I don't think it's possible to have a discussion on these topics without really looking at the customer, at putting them at the heart of it.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Ved. Okay, what we're going to do now, we've got lots of questions flowing in, so please do keep them coming. I'm going to try and address a couple of those questions as well. The first one being, if I can direct this to you first, John, it being, you know, what made you make the move to Materiality? What sort of impulse did it have to make you want to carry out and go through this process as well?
I think it's a combination of, you know, you want to make a difference, you want to make an impact, but you have limited resources. So the objective really is to say, well, you know, what should you do that's important? You know, you don't want to do greenwashing. You don't want to do things that don't really have an impact. You know, either to the performance of the business or to the, you know, environmental considerations. So, you know, it's just being practical. It's a practical drive to say, you know, what areas can we influence most effectively, and where should we put our weight behind those improvements and programs. So really, it's you know, it's treating this consideration like you would any other business consideration, which is to say, okay, I've got a certain amount of resources I can bring to bear. What's important? And that's really what it comes down to, treating this like a business problem and tackling it accordingly.
Okay, brilliant. That's great. Thank you for that. And then, Ellen, if I can come towards yourself as well. This one, I know that at HP you really use the materiality matrix as a tool that all of your employees can use. So, I mean, can you give us some example on how your materiality assessment really impacts and influences your overall business strategy? So not just your sustainability strategy, but the overall strategy and the way that you do business at HP.
Sure. So, after each of the materiality assessment processes, which in terms of schedule, we typically start the process in the fall and really, try to wrap it up in early winter, because we publish our report in the spring typically. So each year when we undertake that process, again, materiality for us, it's living, it continues to change, it needs to reflect the business strategy. The business strategy also needs to be part of the inputs into the process. So I think as we're going through that process, it's really a time for us to stop and see, how is the business changing, how are our customer needs changing, kind of looking through each of those audiences that we just went through in the poll, and really reflect on what's happening, and refreshing that process and refreshing all those inputs and outputs. So it's an ongoing discussion. I think each of the groups internally that are involved in the process, then once the materiality assessment is completed, have that as an ongoing tool to reflect on different choices that are made. So for example, kind of a detailed, immediate application that just recently happened, even small decisions like an employee gift. One of our marketing teams decided for an internal program, they wanted to give a gift to each of the employees, just a small token. And as they were deciding on what to give, they wanted it to have a sustainability angle to it. We brought out the materiality assessment to talk about, where does water play in the importance of HP, i.e., because they were thinking about doing something with a water bottle versus, other ideas around energy efficiency. And we're using it for big decisions, and we're using it for very small decisions at times too, even simple things like how do we connect it back to a small token of a gift that we're giving to employees. So it's something that I think we're continuing to always find new applications for, and it's been a great tool that we're continuing to use and continuing to figure out how to increasingly go deeper with it as well.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thanks for that, Ellen. We've had a really good question come in from Glenn, and it'll be interesting to hear everyone's thoughts on this as well. It's actually asking, do any companies that you know of, or your own companies, actually include materiality development into short or long-term director remuneration as well? Have you heard about that from looking across all of industry, or do any of your companies do that yourself? John, if I come to you first, and then maybe hear Ved and Ellen's thoughts on that as well. Is that the case at Oracle, or have you heard about that anywhere else?
At Oracle, I would say it was indirect. I think the way I'd phrase it is this: is that within each line of business, you try and fold in, our environmental program into the goals of that line of business. It's not sort of seen as a kind of separate idea. So, for example, in our data center operations, our goals are energy reduction and energy efficiency, and that is, clearly material to our business and material to these objectives, and the performance of the staff managing that is rated on that objective. So I would say, it's what we try and do is integrate that into the assessment of the performance of the staff as part of considering these aspects, as part of what constitutes good performance, as opposed to a kind of separate assessment, with a label of materiality on it, as it were. Certainly, that's how we look at it at Oracle.
Okay, brilliant. That's great. Thanks for that. So really looking at it as more of an integration into how you do business rather than a separate thing that needs to be judged. I mean, in terms of life over at Barclays, Ved, do you think, how do you get the internal buy-in for all of the issues that are covered in your materiality matrix? Do you know of any kind of influences or any ways that you can support your employees to really get on board with your issues?
I think what we found, I mean, firstly, I'd agree with what John said, that we wouldn't identify materiality as a performance criteria. I think what we'd use it to do is to ensure that the goals that we've set are sensible and are addressing the right issues. We do have compensation that is aligned to delivery against a whole range of areas. So we've got a balanced scorecard in place which determines compensation for senior executive. It includes outcomes for customers, outcomes for colleagues, outcomes for society under citizenship, and then outcomes for the company, which are the standard financials. And within that whole citizenship and customer space, it really does help us to ensure that what we're focusing on is aligned to what the issues are. And I think in terms of getting the buy-in internally, we've had a lot of support in terms of just ensuring that we take a lot more information. And what I found is actually quite useful is if you do look and you do have this process of internal engagement with a wide range of stakeholders groups, some of whom actually don't engage with each other that much. You know, for example, our investor relations team very rarely would speak to the people who are doing frontline customer insights work, again, you know, amongst the retail customer base. What we found is if you bring in what they find as credible information, you know, whether that's the results of surveys, results of rankings, or specific questions from influential stakeholders, it does give you the baseline to say this information is A, valuable, B, it's giving us insights that we don't normally have. And I think that really does then help us in terms of making sure that we have the buy-in to actually proceed with the issues. The other thing that I find is very useful from a materiality assessment is it brings a degree of rigor and a degree of evidence to an area which can sometimes be very based on perception and based on opinion rather than fact. So this really does help to build the fact base for the programs and the strategy that we want to develop and execute.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Now we're a little bit short on time at the moment. We've only got 5 minutes left as well. So Ellen, if perhaps you could share your thoughts about how to get internal buy-in, and then on top of that, if you could also just provide one piece of practical advice for those people who are listening in, who are just doing materiality for the first time. What would be the holy grail advice that if someone came up to you when you were doing for this the first time and suggested would be really useful?
Sure. So in terms of internal buy-in, you know, I think, you know, you need to commit to the fact that whatever you're driving towards with your materiality assessment, that it's really realistic. So I think at times, you know, we've hoped from the sustainability team's point of view that something might become more important than it actually is, you know, internally. And I think you need to, you know, have that dose of realism so that you're not trying to sell something that isn't real inside. And so if you know what you're doing, it actually reflects the business opportunity, reflects, you know, where your customers want, you know, the company to go and what they're asking for, you know, then you're going to end up with something that's actually fairly honest, and that it's really going to serve you better that way than trying to really push an agenda that might not be as kind of true to, you know, where your business is today and where it needs to go and what the real risks and what the real opportunities are, and the priorities. So I think, you know, this assessment has helped us kind of keep it real and keep us focused, and, you know, encouraged us to make certain trade-offs that we might not wanted to have made, but allows us, you know, greater focus and therefore to make better progress on the most important issues. And again, that's really helped. I think that's along the lines as well of what, you know, G4 is about, is focusing in on, you know, what really truly at the end of the day matters, you know, to your company. In terms of the holy grail for materiality, I would just say, you know, figuring out the right process is really important. So making sure before you kind of launch into your project, you've really got a clear methodology that you want to follow that makes sense, that has, you know, an external and an internal view, and you've identified the right key players. So mapping that out before you get started so that you're very clear of what you're doing, what you're not doing, who you're including, and making sure you've got kind of all the right players involved.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. Thank you. And then, John, if I can come back to yourself as well, just on that last question, what is that holy grail, that really practical advice that you would give to anyone that's looking into either improving or starting a materiality assessment at their company?
Well, there's two dimensions on the matrix. There's the relative importance to business success, let's say, and there's the relative importance to sustainable development. I think environmentally minded people tend to begin with that relative importance of sustainable development. My recommendation is begin with relative importance to business success. If you begin with thinking about that dimension, you're much more likely to align your investment decisions to things that make sense for your business. So that would be the first thing I'd say. And the holy grail is I think, to do that, which is that the ideas of materiality are embedded within your normal business investment decisions. They become a natural part of your assessment of where to deploy resources and where to deploy the energy of your company. So that would be my advice.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you for that. And finally, just to come to yourself, Ved, as well, what would be your #1 top tip for people out there who are looking into materiality?
I guess in a nutshell, I think the two things would be, one is have a clear view, but don't try and over-engineer it immediately. And secondly, there's a lot of information out there, both internally and also externally, that would be very helpful. So the key step is have that dialogue, starting particularly with, you know, your strategy, your investor relations teams, to really understand and bring them on board.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. Thank you for that, Ved. And on that point, if you are looking for external information as well, this whole webinar has been produced leading up to our 9th Annual Reporting and Communications Summit as well. I did notice that Peter Hall actually asked about the UN Guiding Principles Reporting Framework. So for the first time ever, we've got Unilever coming along, who are the first people who have produced that human rights report following that framework. So you'll be able to get insight from them and people like Ellen and everyone else who's involved at the summit as well. So please do have a look at the website, download the brochure, and let us know if you'd like to come along. But I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you to everyone for attending, listening into this webinar. I hope that you find it useful. If you've got any feedback for myself or for the relevant experts as well, please do let us know. And then finally, thank you to our experts as well. So for John Chorley over at Oracle, Ellen Jackowski from HP, and from Vedant Walia at Barclays. Thank you so much for sharing what materiality means to you, and helping everyone else out on their journey as well. That's the end of the webinar. So if you've got any thoughts or feedback, please do post them below. But thank you for joining us, and have a good day.